In 1953, Buford Delaney is longing to go to Paris. He's still living in New York, but his friend, James Baldwin, has moved to Paris back in 1948, and Buford Delaney is eager to go to Paris and visit Baldwin and experience this city of light. After all, throughout Delaney's career, light was something that was of great interest to him. Delaney arrives in 1953 in Paris, is reunited with Baldwin, and the two of them begin to explore this amazing city together. But by 1955, late 1955, Baldwin begins to realize that Delaney is having some emotional difficulties. Friends of Delaney, Delaney's biographer, have all talked about how throughout his life, Buford Delaney was troubled by inner voices, destructive voices that tore him down and that ridiculed him and that tormented him. And in many ways, his art has been talked about as an antidote, a way of his doing battle against those voices, the destructive voices from within. And Baldwin takes note that by late 1955, these voices seem to be getting the upper hand with Delaney. And so he and Richard Olney and some other friends find a way to move Delaney from his inner city Paris studio to a tree-lined suburb outside of Paris at Clamart. And what's significant about this move is that shortly after Baldwin begins visiting Delaney at his Clamart studio, he notices and writes about this profound change in Delaney's art. And it's a change that Baldwin refers to as Delaney's metamorphosis into freedom. And beside me are some paintings from that time at Clamart, from late 1955 to early 1962. And this represents, I think, some really exciting, adventurous moves into abstraction, where Delaney has taken all of the structures that you saw in earlier urban scenes, and it's as if he's broken them apart and released the light and the color in ways that allow for this light and movement to happen in this atmospheric language that is profound. And so while he's at Clamart, he produces paintings like this. And one of the explanations that comes to us through Baldwin's words is that one of the triggers for this new imagery is a window in Delaney's new studio. And it looks out onto an expansive sky and gardens and this natural imagery that Delaney has never really had access to in his previous urban studios. And Baldwin describes how the two men would sit there looking out this window at different times of day as the quality of light changed and the colors changed, times of different weather conditions. And he felt as if Delaney was somehow in his Clamart paintings capturing all the nuances of those changes in weather and light, from the bluest of blues before the sun went completely down to fiery sunsets and sunrises. And it's this movement and light in abstract atmospheric vocabulary that characterizes Delaney's Clamart paintings. One of the exciting new developments that we see in Buford Delaney's art at Clamart is his growing interest in watercolor. It's a medium that allowed him to keep pace with the changing light seen outside the window. And many of his watercolors have this vertical orientation of the window. And in a case such as this untitled work from around 1960, he's building up his composition layer upon layer. Often he'll start with a dark color and then create this serpentine brushwork, allowing these earlier colors to show through. It's almost like this veil upon veil of progressively lighter pigment. And it gives real richness and vibrancy to every composition. This one even has dried pigment and sand that's been sprinkled onto the top surface to give it additional texture. But there are other paintings of his from Clamart that are done in ways that are far simpler, even though they're just as powerful optically. This watercolor is done around the same time as the yellow abstraction that we just saw, but this one is done using a single color, this brilliant cobalt blue that has been basically watered down and rubbed across the entire surface with no layering whatsoever. And so he's experimental in the extreme, trying to capture the effects of changing light and color viewed through the window. And so as we read Baldwin's words, we can see those words come to life in paintings like this, The Bluest of Blues. Buford Delaney's atmospheric abstract vocabulary that he developed while at Clamart was something that he never lost or let go of. It continued to characterize his work even years later after he left Clamart and moved back to Central Paris, such as in this painting called Moving Sunlight from 1965. So in the title, Moving Sunlight, we are able to see those two components that he was so interested in, movement and light. And people often talk about Delaney as being associated with the color yellow. That's certainly the case. He created many yellow paintings. He also loved the color red. But I want to point out how in this painting, which may look to you to be a solid yellow, he in fact is creating a yellow in a way that is so dynamic because of the way that he's layered many other colors in with different shades of yellow. There is olive green, lime green, white, burnt orange, red. All of these colors make up this final palette that we see as maybe a series of nuances of yellow, but in fact there are many other ingredients in the mix if we look closely. And that's part of what gives Delaney's paintings the kind of vibrancy and visual energy that they have on close viewing. Buford Delaney and James Baldwin shared a passion for many things, music being one of them. They loved blues and gospel and jazz, and here is a painting that is inspired by their interest in music. They often went to jazz clubs together, and this abstraction from Delaney's Clamart period is in fact entitled Charlie Parker Yardbird. It's from 1958. Charlie Parker was a famed jazz saxophonist, but you don't see any kind of likeness in this composition. In fact, what Delaney appears to be doing is something that interested a number of modern painters, and that is trying to create a visual equivalent to something experienced by one of our senses other than the eyes. In this case, how do you create a pattern, a sequence of color that can conjure the experience of sound? And here we see what appears to be waves of sound coming potentially from the central source of Parker's instrument. And so it's one of the ways in which Delaney shows us again and again this endless experimentation, especially when it comes to portraiture. Here's another example of Buford Delaney's love of music and his experimental approach to portraiture. This painting from 1968 is entitled Portrait of Ella Fitzgerald, the famous jazz singer. And in 1968, Delaney would have been roughly 67 years old. Again, he is continuing to experiment and push the envelope with his approach to portraiture. We see here what appears to be Clamart abstraction, but yet in the middle of all these fiery, abstract, atmospheric passages, we barely see the facial features of a woman. And this likeness doesn't make us think of Ella Fitzgerald. And when one of Delaney's friends asked him, well, why does it look this way and not more like Ella Fitzgerald actually looked? Delaney explained, I just painted something that was in my mind. And again, with Delaney's approach to portraiture, it's always about his intuitive response to a sitter or a subject, not trying to describe how that sitter actually looked.